Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rob Abbott. I'm the Vice President of Corporate Strategy for Fleetworthy. If you've been reading the trade press lately, you know all too well there's lots going on in the world of truck safety. And so today we're going to try to help make sense of it all. We're going to quickly summarize each of the big issues, and we're going to explain what's going on, why you should care, but most importantly, help you understand what you need to do to prepare for 2026. We're going to move pretty quickly, but before I get started, I want to assure you this is not an infomercial. I know that's often the case with webinars. We're not going to spend the hour talking about our products and services, but we are sponsors of this webinar. Not all of you are familiar with our company, so let me tell you a little bit about Fleetworthy. Fleetworthy is a comprehensive transportation services company that helps fleets be more safe, compliant, and efficient. We offer what you might have heard of before, which is like our Way Station Bypass program, DriveWise, our in-cab safety notifications, our Best Pass toll management services, and our Fleetworthy compliance solutions. And when I'm talking about compliance services, I'm not just talking about DQ file audits and log audits. I'm also talking about IFTA, IRP, maintenance files, the kit and the caboodle, all under one roof with Fleetworthy. So what does that have in common with today's webinar? It's really all about one word: readiness. It's about being prepared for what's coming in the year ahead. Enforcement challenges, accidents, litigation, you name it, right? And so when you think about readiness, think about Fleetworthy. Hey, I'm joined today by a couple of really good co-presenters who are good friends of mine. Because they're good friends, I've earned the right to mock them and poke fun at them mercilessly. I hope they appreciate that. That will certainly make for a more entertaining and fun environment for all of us. First is Steve Kepler. Steve is the co-director at Scopelitis Transportation Consulting in Washington, D.C. Many of you know about Scopelitis Consulting. He's a former executive director of CVSA, the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance, which is the Association of Commercial Motor Vehicle Enforcement Agencies. He's an industry veteran, and by veteran I mean old. He started his career with FMCSA many years ago as both an investigator and an inspector. Don't ask me the difference. Steve, take a minute to tell us about STC. What do you do?
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I'm old, but you can see by my hair.
Yes,
And
yes. You have hair? Okay, yes. Yeah.
so yeah, we do a lot of work in the safety and compliance space. We work with a lot of fleets, large and small, industry service providers, safety technology companies, insurance companies, online training providers, and a range of other types of organizations in the commercial vehicle fleet safety space. We do a lot of government advocacy work. We do training. We do mock audits. We do policy development. We also do government advocacy work, and we even support some government research efforts. So, a wide range of activities we do here at STC. And we're owned by the Scopelitis Law Firm, which is the largest transportation law firm in the country. We're a wholly owned subsidiary of the firm, and we really exist to try and solve problems.
Well, indeed you do. You guys have a great reputation. I know that you and especially and your co-director Sean Garney are especially well known in the trucking industry. So appreciate you joining us today. Also joining us today is Brandon Wiseman. He's the president of TruckSafe Consulting. They help carriers build state-of-the-art safety programs. He too is a longtime trucking industry veteran. He's an attorney with the Childress Law Firm, and previously he was a partner with Scopelitis, Garvin Light, Hanson, and Fury. Now, those of you who are on social media or on the internet all the time know Brandon all too well. He's on podcasts and webcasts and posting on LinkedIn. His social media presence is rivaling that of Sabrina Carpenter and Chapel Roan, only he has a better wardrobe. Brandon Wiseman, tell us, what do you do with TruckSafe?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Appreciate the invite. And yeah, we do a lot of the same stuff that Steve and his team do, helping fleets with DOT compliance on both the law firm side and also on the consulting side. So digging into their data, helping them to stay out of the crosshairs is really the name of the game there. So as you said, we try and push out a lot of content through our various channels, online courses, podcast episodes, all of that type of stuff. So yeah, excited to be here.
Super. Well, I don't want to single you out, Steve. We also appreciate that you don't dress like Chapel Roan. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about today, right? So we're going to cover the big issues. We know there's a unlimited number of them lately, but let's talk about the biggest ones. We're going to talk about non-domiciled CDLs, the English language proficiency requirements, ELD certifications or the certifications of ELD devices, self-certification, whether or not those devices are compliant, changes to the CSA safety measurement system that are pending, the National Registry of Medical Providers, you're hearing a lot about that, and the CDL training provider registry. So there's a lot to talk about here. On each of these issues, we're going to move pretty quickly, right? We're not going to spend a long time talking about each of them. We're going to tell you what you need to know. What's the backdrop? What's going on this thing? What to expect next? And most importantly, what can you do to prepare for it, right? So help you summarize and make sense of what you're reading about in the press in a very rapid format. So let's get started. Let's talk about the first issue. Let's talk about non-domiciled CDLs. So states have, as long as I've can remember, been allowed to issue licenses to drivers who are not regularly domiciled in their states on a long-term basis. And by domiciled, I don't mean they're merely just there for a period of time. Domiciled is your true, fixed, permanent address to which you always intend to return. That's a regulatory definition, right? True, fixed, permanent address to which you intend to return. So who qualifies for that? Who would be able to get a non-domicile license? And generally, there are exceptions. It's generally for folks who are perhaps visa holders, who are in the country on a short-term period and have a work authorization or a work permit. There are some other cases as well. Audits have found, FMCSA audits have found that some states have issued these licenses in error. And it's caused states to risk their federal funding because, as a condition of federal funding, you have to be following the licensing processes properly. And also, there's some risk that people who have been issued these licenses that were issued in error could have their license decertified. So we've been hearing a lot about this in the press, but Brandon, the articles haven't really been clear about what are the errors the states have made in issuing these CDLs. What are the common mistakes that we're hearing about?
Yeah, so FMCSA has published some of its findings from its audit that it did nationwide. Folks have probably seen this in some of the industry publications. I think the last I checked, there are like 19 states and then DC that have received what are called preliminary letters of noncompliance. And so, what exactly are they doing wrong when it comes to issuing these non-domiciled CDLs? Well, as you would expect with these types of licenses, there are regulatory guardrails that are put up to make sure that the states, when they issue them, they are following certain rules and only issuing them to people who are entitled to hold them. And so some of the findings from the FMCSA's audit discovered, for example, non-domiciled CDLs being issued for periods of time that well exceeded the length of the foreign driver's authorization, work authorization to be in the United States, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense if their license is conditioned on their, legal status in the country. If their legal status expires, then it doesn't make sense to have their CDL continue on after that. So there were several of those discovered. Also, certain states not doing any verification of lawful presence for the folks that they end up issuing these licenses to. And then the last big one that I'll mention has to do with some states just not understanding who these licenses are available to. So we saw several instances with some states issuing them to Canadian and Mexican domiciled drivers, which under the rules, you're not supposed to be issuing these types of license to those drivers. We have trade agreements with those countries that allow drivers of those countries that are operating in the United States to operate under their Canadian CDL or their Mexican CDL equivalent. So there's no reason for them to be issued non-domiciled CDLs. So it's those types of problems that the FMCSA discovered in their audit.
All right, so we offer reciprocity for Canadian and Mexican CDLs, so they should have CDLs from their state, their country of domicile, so we shouldn't be issuing non-domiciled CDLs to them. But it sounds like the more prevalent issue is somebody might have a work permit. Let's say they get a visa. I think typically a visa term is 6 months and it's renewable once or twice, maybe. And so the most you might get is 18 months. How long is a standard license term, Brandon? I mean, it varies by state, but how many years is a
Varies by
license?
state, but some states are several years, 8 years, 10
Sure.
years, and so that's what we saw in the audit is that some states, I think New York was the one that was called out that was issuing 8-year CDLs to non-domiciled, foreign drivers that had a work authorization that expired in 6 months or a year. So,
Yeah, so somebody could overstay their visa, they're past their work authorization, they still have a CDL, right?
right.
Steve Kepler, we've heard a lot about California, Pennsylvania, a little bit about a lot about New York and a little bit about North Carolina. Is this what we're going to hear about this? Is it kind of blowing over, or what happens next? We're going to hear more about this, you think?
Yeah, I think there's several things in play right now. The FMCSA issued an interim final rule in September to try and change the rules of the game, if you will. And that interim final rule, they gave 60 days to comment, and they got over 8,000 comments to the rule, and a large portion of the commenters were against it. And there was also a lawsuit filed to essentially challenge the agency both on procedural grounds, not following the Administrative Procedures Act, as well as substantive grounds saying you're discriminatory. This is discriminatory action. So the DC Circuit issued a stay of that interim final rule in November. And so what's been going on since that time, essentially the agency said, we need some time please give us some time to evaluate the comments, and we'll issue, the intention is that, well, the thinking is they're going to issue a revised rule at some point. The thinking possibly is before March, because what happened in March 3rd, there is some action the court took to essentially the agency and the parties need to start filing reports. So I think this is on the fast track. But even when that happens, most likely there's going to be lawsuits that continue beyond there. So it's going to be challenging for a while. And I think each state's doing things differently. As Brandon said, there's almost half the states have been issued non-compliant determinations, preliminary determinations. And so what has to happen there is those states have 30 days to issue a corrective action plan to FMCSA of what they're going to do to fix the problems. And then FMCSA has to agree or disagree, and decide on, okay, how much time are we going to give those states to come into compliance? And all the while, we've got, states handling things differently. Some are continuing to issue non-domiciled CDLs. Some are issuing under the IFR standard. Some of them are issuing under the previous rules for non-domiciled, existing. It's still in existence because there's a stay of the rule. So I think it's really important that folks understand and track with what's going on in each of the states on this topic.
But it seems like every morning I wake up and there's a new state audit that's been released. Have we seen the last of those, or are we going to see like, oh, there's another state and another state and another state?
Well, you're right. It's a drip drip thing. And I think it's really not easy to find. FMCSA has the states posted on their website. It's hard to
Mhm.
find, but they're not pushing out notifications. So it's important that folks, fleets are tracking this pretty closely.
So the people who are listening to this webinar or watching this webinar should know, hey, just because my state hasn't been found not compliant yet doesn't mean we're in the clear. We could wake up tomorrow and find they release audit results from my state. Brandon, for the fleet execs who are listening, and particularly the safety professionals, what should they do? Should they go through the DQ files and look at each and every license to see if any of them are non-domicile license? And if they find one, as an attorney, what would you advise them to do about that? What should
But
they do?
yeah, first of all, to your earlier point, Rob, even if FMCSA doesn't independently release any audit findings for a particular state, that's something else to be aware of is that many states are just doing these audits internally on their own, and they may find themselves to be non-compliant and then on their own issue some kind of a corrective action plan to try and bring this into compliance. So that's certainly a possibility as well. But to your other question, what should fleets be doing immediately? We're kind of in a wait and see pattern, unfortunately, until we see what the final rule is going to look like. So I don't want to give fleets a bunch of homework on this. What I have been advising my clients to do, which I think is just important to take stock of your existing universe of drivers that are operating for you and get a handle on how many of these drivers that are working for me hold this type of license. And I think that's important because the risk you run is, and this is playing off what we just talked about, if either FMCSA slaps the wrist of your state and forces them to change up how they're issuing these, or the state independently does it on their own, there's a risk that you could have a driver out there on the road operating on a valid non-domiciled CDL today, and then all of a sudden the state pulls that out from underneath of them, and tomorrow they're now not properly licensed to operate the equipment that you're expecting them to operate, and that creates a significant amount of exposure to you
For
to
sure.
have drivers out there operating without the
Yeah.
proper type of license. Those are considered red flag violations, very serious issue. So what
Right.
can you do about that? Well, first of all, like I said, just make sure that you understand where that's a possibility. How many of these drivers do I have working for me? And then the thing that I've been recommending to clients for probably 10 years now is really the only way that's a real solution to that potential concern is continuous license monitoring. I don't know why this isn't a federal requirement yet, but this is a service that will notify fleets, not always immediately, but pretty soon after, if there's any kind of negative action taken against one of their enrolled drivers' licenses. It'll tell them if it's been downgraded or something like that. Because otherwise, you're just relying on the driver telling you that something has happened to their license, which they're not always inclined to do. And so
Right.
that continuous license monitoring, I think it's worth its weight in gold for sure.
I think that's smart. All right, good advice. Let's move on to the
Yeah,
next. Yeah,
I
sorry,
think,
Steve.
Rob, just one other thing to add to that, I
Yeah.
think to Brandon's point is, the states that have been deemed to be in non-compliant, essentially, they are going to have to cancel those drivers' licenses, and so that are non-compliant. So the other thing to certainly fleets to communicate to their drivers is be on the lookout for any mail comes from the DMV about action on their license and making sure that the driver notifies the fleet if and when that happens.
Yeah, good advice. All right, let's move on to the next one. Let's talk about English language proficiency. So, as long as I can remember, English language proficiency has been required for drivers. And to draw a distinction, it's not fluency, it's proficiency. And proficiency means they merely have to be able to read road signs, make entries on reports, and answer questions for officials. That's been required as long as I can remember, and people could be cited for it. But now there are much stiffer consequences. Drivers can be placed out of service, yanked out of the truck sometimes many miles from home. So now you got a driver and a truck several states away. Driver's been placed out of service. You can't fix it real fast like you can with a bald tire. Steve, when you were pardon me, the executive director of CVSA, this issue was upon us at that time. It comes and goes, right? There's been some ebbs and flows in English language proficiency. Give some historical perspective on the out of service requirement for English language proficiency here.
Sure, thanks, Rob. Yeah, this has a long tail to it. Actually, it's been a rule for 90 years, believe it or not. And so back in 1997, there was an advance notice of proposed rulemaking introduced to try and address the rule. And it was prompted by an ACLU filing petition because it's a violation of the Civil Rights Act. Essentially, what from CSA eventually ended up doing is withdrawing that ANPRM that was around the NAFTA discussion requirements, and we talked about the reciprocity and things like that. So they withdrew the rulemaking. In 2003, CVSA decided to petition from CSA for rulemaking to really address it. And they really asked for a couple things. One, to have us, because it's a subjective rule, right? So they asked the agency to look at developing a standardized test procedure roadside and look at making sure that the licensing requirements mirror what the rules say. And so that petition for rulemaking was filed. FMCSA denied that petition. So in 2005, CVSA decided to make it an out of service criteria. That passed in 2005. And then for the next 10 years or so, we had enforcement in the out of service condition. And then essentially what happened at that time is it was removed from the out of service criteria. There was an ACLU stepped in again, tried to threaten some discriminatory action. And so there was some action done to look at this from a safety perspective. And so CVSA, did some data and some research and discovered through that exercise they could not substantiate the connection to an imminent hazard on the road. So they removed that from the criteria. Fast forward to April 28th this year, or 25 actually, and President Trump's executive order tried to address a number of things, non-domiciled CDLs, which you talked about, which is one of them, and also English language proficiency, to rescind the guidance that was put in place by FMCSA when it was removed from the criteria, and also to make it an out of service condition. CVSA acted on that in a couple of weeks later,
Here
and
we are.
here we are. So it went into the out of service criteria in June 25th, and it's been in place now for about 6 months.
So
7 months.
the executive order seemed to sort of bypass that imminent hazard objection that people were having before. Brandon, if you're advising fleets, what should they do? Should they be looking at each and every one of their drivers who was hired, perhaps even before this became an out of service item, and testing them on English language proficiency, or should they just be testing new drivers that are being hired? And if so, what should they use to test them? What would you advise them to do?
Yeah, it's kind of a sticky spot to be in. And even more breaking news, I think I just saw yesterday that English language proficiency was in the funding bill and was passed as a law that FMCSA going forward has to bake this into the regulations that it be an out of service condition going forward. So, um, now hopefully, if nothing else, that at least prevents some of this back and forth that we're seeing based on who happens to be in office at any given time. If it's
Right.
baked into the legislation, FMCSA's hands are going to be tied in terms of how it treats it going forward. So, I think we have to, as fleets, just anticipate that that's going to be how it's going to be for the foreseeable future. Is this is going to be an out of service condition? So, to your question, Rob, what do we need to do? Well, certainly, what you need to do is any new drivers you are hiring, you need to have some processes and controls in place to make sure that among all of the other things you're doing to vet your drivers and qualify them, that English language proficiency is part of that. What that looks like is going to vary from fleet to fleet, but and there's emerging technology out there that helps to accomplish this. It can be a fairly simple, just conversation with the applicant to make sure that you can communicate with them. But you need to have something like that, and you need to document something like that is my advice so that, on the back end of things, if you hire them and then they get tagged with one of these violations roadside, or you end up in highway accident litigation and you're called to task for, hey, what'd you do to make sure that they were proficient in English? Then you've got some documentation to show the controls you had in place and that type of stuff. So at the very least, on a go forward basis, I'm recommending my fleet clients do something like that. In terms of all existing drivers, kind of just depends on your bandwidth, really. I mean, if you're a huge fleet, maybe you don't have the bandwidth to bring everybody back in and redo a test, but maybe you have some kind of a stopgap measure where your dispatchers are on the phone with them and they can be your first line of defense here to alert you to any problems. And then those that get alerted, maybe you bring back in and you go through the process again. But if you're a smaller fleet, maybe you do have the bandwidth to do that for all of your existing drivers. So kind of a fleet by fleet analysis, really.
So let's help some of our fleets avoid a massive pothole or stepping on a landmine. How many more metaphors can I use, Brandon? Uh, should they select certain drivers for testing based on how they feel they may or may not pass the test, or should they be looking at every driver?
You got to be a little careful because then you start to run into employment issues. And I'm not an employment lawyer, so I'm not going to speak on them. But I know enough to know that there are some current concerns there when you start to target drivers based on how they look or something to
Right.
that effect. So I would
Okay.
caution you not to do something like that.
Yeah, that's
And
probably wise. And I was tossing you the softball because I know some in the audience might think, well, why don't we just test these guys with these foreign sounding last names? Steve Kepler, let me ask you a question. You got law enforcement roadside, and there's a guidance that was given to law enforcement by FMCSA last year, which basically told them how to test the drivers. Said ask these questions. There's a redacted version. There's a non-redacted version out there on the internet, and so people can go look for that, and they might choose to use that to test their drivers. But Steve, will enforcement of this be uniform? And I ask you this because can a fleet know that, hey, my driver had a roadside inspection in California, and he passed the English language proficiency test, and now he's going to go on I-10 across Texas, Alabama, Florida, Louisiana, not in that order. Can you be sure that if he passes in California, he'll also pass in those other states?
Well, short answer is no. And I think just one thing back to the couple of Brandon's points, and just to
Yes.
reiterate, be consistent, be uniform in your evaluation. Don't be selective because you're opening yourself up, and make sure you document everything.
Yep.
And one of the reasons I say that is because of what you just mentioned. We are going to have we have inconsistent enforcement, and we will. It's a subjective rule, and it's not necessarily enforcement's fault. It's the rule writer's fault, right? And so, and the data is bearing this out as we see across the country. And because there's some variability in what questions to ask, that's where most of the violations are occurring, and how it's up to the inspector to make that determination roadside or interpret. And so that's where a lot of the challenges occur. And you're right, FMCSA has released a redacted version. And I think importantly for the fleets, uh, what CBSA did in the out of service criteria is they actually specified the FMCSA enforcement guidance as the out of service condition. That's critically important, right? That is the out of service standard. So as long as you can document that you've done what you can with your driver to ensure that they're meeting that standard and can document that, and have training if there's a violation, have training, document that. And then if that driver, we're going to see this play out over months because, drivers don't get inspected all the time. They may get stopped today, they're good, but next month or 6 months, they're going to be put out of service. Then that you have that evidence that you can submit and file a data queue challenge, right? So I
Cool.
think that's important to help get us through, and not just now, but in the future.
Yeah, no, I think that's good advice. So,
Hey,
uh,
Steve, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Put you on the spot here. So we saw this when the FMCSA released the initial enforcement policy last year. It was kind of a throwaway statement in the policy that uh, didn't really seem to have any teeth at first. But the reason I mention it is because I saw FMCSA just release some new guidance on ELP, and it was in response to specific questions posed to them by the CVSA. One of the questions was, hey, your policy mentions something about initiation of a driver disqualification by FMCSA. What exactly do you mean by that, FMCSA? That in addition to being placed out of service, that the FMCSA or somebody else can initiate some kind of a disqualification against the drivers. So FMCSA responded to that in their new guidance and said, yeah, that's essentially a letter of disqualification that we, the agency, can issue. And that's really all they said. Do you have any idea what they're talking about with this?
It's for the federal staff because the federal staff don't have the enforcement powers like roadside enforcement does.
Okay.
It's really to give them the tool to initiate the disqualification action.
But does that disqualify them on the state licensing side of things, or just if they were
No,
to ever come in and do an audit and they
they
would
were,
find, yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, not because they don't have any power over the licensing action,
yeah.
right?
Hmm. Okay.
all right, guys, we got to pick up the pace a little bit, and we're going to do that. But my summary of that issue is, hey, if you got a driver who passed the roadside inspection in California, don't assume they also will in Louisiana, Alabama, and Florida. Fair? Fair.
Fair
All
enough.
right, let's talk about ELDs. So, electronic logging devices have to meet certain specific technical requirements in order to be qualified as ELDs. And ever since the mandate that went into effect, whoa, almost a decade ago now, uh, the providers, the technology suppliers, have been permitted to self-certify that the devices are compliant, meaning that they're intricately synchronized to the vehicle, that they're secure, that they can prevent against fraud. But FMCSA has recently begun to realize that some of these devices are non-compliant and at a more rapid pace are decertifying them, taking them off the list. Brandon, put a finer point on this for us. What sort of problems are they seeing that are causing the devices to be non-compliant? And are they just totally saying, hey, you can't use these devices anymore?
Yeah, I don't think it's all that surprising that this has become an issue for a number of reasons. Number one, if you think back to why or why the agency decided to move forward with ELDs in the first place, a big part of it was to try and cut down on fraud when it came to, paper logs and drivers and carriers trying to get more time in their day by, having multiple logbooks or something to that effect. So it's not all that surprising then, now that we mandate these new devices to try and cut down on that, that there have evolved new ways to falsify records of duty status one way or the other. And the bad actors in our industry have found a number of ways to do that, including by manipulating the devices. And one of the problems we have is that the system that we have set up for ELD providers to essentially certify themselves that they have met these technical specifications in the regulations is a self-certification process. Unlike Canada, which went the other way with this, which requires a third-party certification, a disinterested party to come in and say in Canada, hey, your device complies with Canadian ELD technical specifications. We don't have that in the US. We have device manufacturers just saying, hey, trust me, my device meets all of these technical specifications. And surprise, surprise, many of them do not. And so FMCSA is trying to get control of this now on the back end by monitoring reports that come in of noncompliance from law enforcement and through their complaint hotline and stuff like that, and then investigating on the back end. And if they find that the devices are non-compliant one way or another, then they are taking action to remove them from the list of self-certified devices. To your point, or to your question, there are many ways that or many issues that the FMCSA is finding. They haven't released their specific findings in this context, but I know anecdotally that some of the things that are happening out there with some of these devices are devices that allow for unauthorized edits to the driver's driving time, which is supposed to be immutable time, synchronized with the engine, as you said, so that if it automatically detected driving, we don't want a system where that can be edited away and removed from the device. But it turns out there are devices that allow that type of thing. Also, we're hearing a lot of reports of um, foreign entities having access to the devices and making edits to the logs offshores, that type of stuff. So that's what
Hacking.
we're hearing about. Yep.
Yeah, they're hacking. All right, so Kepler, you may remember back when we were developing the ELD mandate, there was a bit of a rush to get ELDs mandated and adopted, and so we decided that self-certification was the fastest path to do that, and we'd worry about, device quality later. Um, but will self-certification be discontinued soon? I mean, do you see us going down a path where we're going to have third-party certification, and if so, when?
Well, I think there's critical mass in the industry that this is the direction folks want to go, whether it's
Yeah,
the enforcement, and I think many in industry want to move in this direction for lots of different reasons. And if you look at the whole slate of the Green Book, the regulations, if you look at what rule is most relevant to or could be most correlating with profitability, it's hours of service. So there's a vested interest for some of the unscrupulous operators to try and take advantage of it. And so I think the challenge is going to be I know Derek Bars, the administrator, has come out publicly that he wants to get rid of all self-certification programs at the agency, ELDs being top of the list, and ELDT providers, which we're going to talk about. But he hasn't had a lot of time. And so
yeah,
he's also has to contend with the fact that we've got this executive order on deregulatory actions, right?
right.
So that has to be accounted for and the cost benefit analysis. And if I'm going to institute a new rule, I got to take 10 off the books. But I think this is a priority. And like I said, I think there's critical mass. I think in the interim, you're going to see continued ramped up enforcement, and they instituted a new vetting process. So I think in the interim, you're going to see a lot more of that going on. Enforcement's getting smarter, and you're seeing violations tick up the list. So, but I do think there's critical mass, and I think we'll get a proposal to do that. I just don't know if it'll get completed under this administration. We'll see.
Yeah, that's probably realistic. Brandon, should fleets be concerned? I mean, if they're using the most popular ELDs, the big brand names we all know, and I think you and I and Steve could all name them, should they be concerned that their ELD will soon end up on this list of decertified devices?
Yeah, I think if you're using one of the big names out there, you could take comfort in that fact. Obviously, we got publicly traded ELD providers now. They can't afford to have devices that are not compliant with the regulations. And so, yeah, you could take comfort in that if you're one of those fleets. If you've got a different device that's not one of the main five or six out there, what can you do to give yourself some comfort? I don't know that there's a whole lot you can do. You could ask the device manufacturer to provide you some kind of assurances that their device lives up to the technical specifications. I think it's going to be a mixed bag in terms of what you get, if anything, to that response. So other than that, you just got to kind of watch over your day-to-day hours of service monitoring through whatever device you're using. And if you're seeing, issues pop up, particularly around editing and stuff like that, then you need to get a hold of it before FMCSA does or law enforcement does, because that can really quickly balloon into something. Then all of a sudden, if they yank your device off the list, now you've got a very short fuse for how quickly you have to get new devices put in the
Right.
trucks.
Right. Like
And
8 days. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So not a lot of time. So yeah, my general advice to any fleets that's looking for an ELD solution is just stick with the name brands out there and avoid the headache that's inevitably going to come from having to worry about non-compliant devices.
Yeah. Don't go shopping cheap for a no-name brand you never heard of. That's an app-based system that hasn't been vetted. And you're right. Got it.
Well, and another quick thing to do too, on top of that, obviously double check the US registry, but double check the Canadian registry. A lot of the legitimate providers are also certified in Canada. So
Smart.
that's another easy check to do.
A good idea, eh?
Hey,
Hey, let's talk about CSA. So ever since CSA was released, gosh, ultimately late 2010, there's been lots of debate over the accuracy and fairness of CSA safety measurement system scores. You may remember that Congress mandated that the National Academy of Sciences study the fairness and accuracy of CSA scores in identifying unsafe carriers. FMCSA then vetted some changes to the program and they announced them in 2023, 3 years ago. So first of all, Brandon, there were a whole bunch of changes announced. Can you summarize sort of quickly for us what were the most significant changes in your view that they announced?
Yeah, I would say there were probably six or seven fairly significant changes that have been proposed. Although I use the word "propose" loosely because this is not a rulemaking. This is just
Right.
FMCSA kind of pushing these through at the direction of Congress. Um, and yeah, to your point, there's a lot that goes into it. I've done a 2-hour webinar just on those changes in the past. If anybody's interested in looking at it, but I would say the
Glad
big
I
ones.
listened.
Yeah, I would say the big ones are, we've currently got 7 categories known as the basics that carriers are scored in based on roadside inspection data that gets filtered into the system. We're still going to have 7, but there's going to be some changes to what the categories are. Namely, we're doing away with the drug and alcohol basic as a standalone basic. It's going to be combined with the unsafe driving basic, so that leaves 6. So where does the 7th come from? We're going to split out the vehicle maintenance basic into 2 categories: vehicle maintenance and then vehicle maintenance driver observed. The rationale being, maintenance is the basic that brings in the most violation data of all 7. So if I've got a high vehicle maintenance score, there's just so much data in there that it's hard for me to get a handle of what is the root cause of my problem here. So FMCSA's idea here, and I think it was a good one, was let's split these maintenance violations into essentially 2 groups. One that we're calling driver observed are essentially issues that a driver could or should have caught had they done a thorough enough pre-trip inspection. That's the idea.
Yeah.
Versus just the standard maintenance category going forward is going to be the more latent issues that could only be discovered usually in a full inspection of the vehicle. So if we've got a high driver observed category going forward, the idea is then I probably need to get a better control of my pre-trip inspections. So that's a big one. Also, the way that we assign severity weights to a lot of these violations. Anybody that's dug through the FMCSA's SMS methodology knows that there's a whole scoring system behind this, several hundred-page scoring methodology. If you're ever bored and need some help sleeping, you can take a look at that. But right now we have a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of the severity of all of the conceivable violations. I think there are over 900 conceivable violations. Each of them has a severity weight of either of between 1 and 10. We're doing away with that. We're going to go to a severity weight of either 1 or 2, depending on whether it's an out of service violation or not. So, really, just to kind of simplify the methodology and make it easier for fleets to understand what's contributing to their scores. So, those are the big ones. There's, as I said, a handful of others, but
Sure. All right. So, Steve, question for you. Obviously, this has been going on a long time. And Congress mandated that they do something about this, what, in 2015, I think?
Right.
And they announced the changes a few years ago. Are they actually going to implement them? Is that coming? Is that going to happen
Well,
this year?
yeah, it has been 10 years back since the FAST Act. But I think one other thing I'll just add to the changes, I think that is a lot of folks haven't really, it's kind of a nuanced thing, but right now, yeah, if it's an out of service condition, roadside, the current severity weight, you get a 2 point addition to the severity weight, right? So you could have 1 to 10 severity weight and a two extra 2 points for an out of service condition. In
Oh,
the new proposed changes, it's double weighted out of service conditions. So your out of service violations are going to have an outsized impact on your score. So it puts more emphasis on out of service conditions. So I just wanted to
right.
make sure fleets were aware of that. Um,
Sure.
I think I was expecting them to put this out by the end of last year. I really was. And I think they got overcome by events on the things we've already talked about on this webinar. So I think they're committed to doing it. By and large, industry supports pretty broad-based support, with some exceptions and things like some that folks didn't like the severity weighting approach. Some folks still have problems with geographic disparity on enforcement. But I think it'll come out sometime this spring, probably by June. And I think it's going to be tied to the safety fitness determination and some rule in some point. We can talk about that too.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. I think in the spirit of time, we need to move on a little bit, but let's talk about the National Registry. So we talked about the self-certification. We'll talk about self-certification in terms of CDL training, but first, let's talk about the National Registry. So long ago, FMCSA created this National Registry of Medical Examiners who are qualified to administer physicals to truck drivers. And before that, physicals could be administered by anybody who was licensed by the state to perform physicals. In some states, that was doctors. In other states, it was doctors, doctor of osteopathy, and some states even chiropractors. And so what they did was they said, well, look, these folks might be qualified to do physicals, but they might not be familiar with FMCSA's rules, particularly with respect to blood pressure and diabetes and sleep apnea. So they established this registry. We have the qualified examiners on that. That's part one. Part two is we're supposed to then automatically transmit the results of that exam from the examiner to the state licensing agency. So we're not reliant on a driver carrying around a piece of paper, handwritten piece of paper to say, sure, I'm qualified. See, it was signed by a doctor here or a chiropractor. That second step, where all of the state licensing agencies have records of drivers' medical qualifications, that hasn't happened. Kepler, is this system working? If not, why not? And when's it going to work?
Well, I tell you, it was clunky coming out of the gate in June of last year. There was lots of challenges that I think a lot too many cooks in the kitchen, right? You've got medical examiners, part of the process. You've got DMVs, you've got the registry, you've got data that's being transmitted between everybody. The DMVs are all their own fiefdoms. So we had a lot of challenges coming out of the gate, a lot of errors, and a lot of states not being able to meet their obligations under the rules. And there's still 9 states that aren't compliant. And so the thinking is 8 of them will happen this year. The ninth doesn't even have it on their roadmap. So
People can probably guess which one that is.
that's right. Yes, exactly. And so what happened? FMCSA has issued several waivers to allow drivers to continue to carry the paper medical certificate. The latest waiver extends until April 10th. And so there's still a lot of challenges that are going on here. It's better than it was, but still a lot of fleets are having issues and concerns with this process.
So you think within a year we'll get those other 8 states, and then we'll be left with that other large state on the left coast. One thing that really binds the states to doing this is that it's a condition of getting federal funding, and that really matters, that federal funding, if you're Rhode Island. But California has I think now, fourth largest economy globally. I mean, they've bypassed Japan. Is it really a threat to pull California's funding over this?
Well, it's a good question. If their CDL program gets decertified, it's not going to really make a difference anyway.
Right. Right. It's the same funding. Right.
Right. So, I think 700,000 CDL drivers in California alone. So,
Jeez.
right? So if if they don't come to agreement here, we're going to have some major commerce disruptions. So
Yeah.
I've got to believe that things are going to get worked out here over time, and cooler heads will prevail. But you don't know. There's things that have happened this year that I've never seen happen in my 34 years. I've never seen mix-up funding get pulled from a state.
Right.
I
Right.
think the path of least resistance there is that let's just decertify them. Then, as you say, Steve, we don't have to worry about them
That's
getting the
right.
act together for the medical cert. But then the
Yeah,
irony of that is then all those 700,000 drivers, CDL drivers in California have to go get non-domiciled CDLs in the neighboring
that's right.
state.
That's right. Brandon, if you're a fleet, what do you have to do to protect yourself here? I mean, do you have to make sure that they're on file with the states that are participating? What do you do with the states that aren't participating? What
Yeah,
do you do
it's
here?
just a mess. If you're a interstate fleet with drivers in multiple states, I am sympathetic to your current condition because you're having to understand how each of the states are handling it, particularly if you're in one of those 8 or 9 states that are still don't have their act together. So at the very least, we're still FMCSA recommended this for their part in their waiver that they issued. We're also recommending that you make sure your drivers are up to speed on what's going on, number one. And then also, number two, they should still be requesting a paper copy of their med card for the time being and just having that kind of at least as a sanity check on this. Even under the waiver, though, those paper med cards are still not the valid proof of the driver's physical qualifications after the 60 days after the
Right.
new med card is issued. It's only the MVR. So that's kind of the other piece to this is that fleets need to make sure that they have the processes and controls in place to be running MVRs, tracking when their CDL drivers and non-CDL drivers for that matter, current med cards expire. And then for the CDL drivers in particular, making sure you have a control set up so that you're running a new MVR close to the expiration date of their old med card so that you can then have that MVR showing the new medical examination as proof of their physical qualification. So you need to make sure you have that set up.
Yep. Good advice. All right, let's
Yeah.
move on to the next one. Let,
Sorry, Rob. I just wanted
yep.
to add additional thing
Please.
there. I think the other thing that you may want to consider is before the driver even leaves the medical examiner's office, try and get confirmation that it's been submitted or uploaded, or get confirmation from the ME that they've electronically transmitted the data. So at least you've got some level of comfort that it's been successfully transmitted from the
And
examiner's
along
office.
those same lines, have the driver check that the medical examiner took down their CDL number correctly.
Yes. Yep.
Bingo.
A lot of data
Bingo.
errors. Yep.
All right, that's good advice, guys. I appreciate it. Let's talk about the last issue I have on my list. We've talked about self-certification, we've talked about registries. Well, this topic has them both. In 2022, FMCSA created a registry of providers who meet requirements to properly train truck drivers in how to be truck drivers and get licensed as CDL holders. This was a self-certification process. As training providers had to certify, I, on my oath, certify that we meet these requirements, we've done these things, right? Lately, FMCSA has investigated and decertified thousands of them. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there were 16,000 on the list and 7,000 are at risk of getting decertified, darn near half. Brandon, what went wrong here?
Yeah, I think there are more than that on the registry. I think there are over 30,000 training providers.
Wow.
I've seen 16,000 reported as the number, but I think there are actually over 30,000 registry
Yeah.
or examiners on the list. But your point is well taken. It's a huge number of entities that have been pulled off. Now, with that said, if you start to dig into the list of those that have been pulled off, a lot of those are entities that never actually provided any training. They just listed
Ah,
themselves on the registry, and so they were pulled off for non-activity or
okay.
inactivity, I should say. Also, a lot of them were just weird entities. There were a lot of like Boy Scout troops on there and others that you wouldn't normally think of entities that would be providing entry level driver training. And a lot of those were on the list that got pulled off. So I'm not sure how many of the ones that got pulled off were, nefarious actors. I get it. If you're DOT, you want to make a splash with your press releases, and so it looks like you've done something. But I don't know. I'm sure some of those deserve to be pulled off the list, but a lot of those maybe were just kind of pulled off out of convenience. So, but it's still an issue because it's kind of right there alongside the ELD self-certification. It's exposing the problems with
Right.
self-certification processes. And you know, it sounds good on paper when you've got an agency like FMCSA that's always short of staff and struggling to enforce its rules, you know, through things like audits and stuff like that. How in the world is it going to have time to, you know, certify ELD devices or certified training providers? And so it looks self-certification looks good on paper until you realize then, you know, now we've got all of these fraudulent actors that the FMCSA is going to have to tackle on the back end. So yes,
Cool.
I think that along with ELDs are going to continue to be in the enforcement spotlight over the coming days here. And so, yeah, it's an issue.
Well, you gave a lot of insight there I wasn't aware of. I appreciate that. You've earned your merit badge, Brandon, in transportation training. Steve, tell me, how should fleets protect themselves? Should they be looking at every one of their drivers and see what school they went to and whether or not that school was decertified? Do they need to go to that level?
Yep.
Or should they take some solace in the fact that, hey, the guy earned his CDL, right? He passed his test. He has a current valid CDL. Is that enough? And Brandon, don't turn off that microphone. So I'm coming back to you. I'm going to pin the lawyer into a corner on this one. Steve Kepler, what says you first?
Well, I think you can't assume that because the driver has a CDL that they're a good driver,
Yeah.
right? You just can't. And so and since FMCSA is, I mean, thankfully they're taking some action now to vet these providers, but they're essentially haven't done it. And so it really comes back to the carrier to do your own vetting and making sure the school first check they're on the registry, make sure that you need to vet them like you're interviewing someone to bring on board on your staff because your drivers have been trained by them, and so you need to understand how do they approach the training, what's the theory versus the practical, how do they assess driver competencies, who's training them, what's the trainer's experience with their credentials, and so all these types of what's their facilities like, and are they members of the Commercial Vehicle Training Association as an
Right.
example. So you need to
Right.
take those additional steps to make sure that you're comfortable. Talk to your peers. Who are they using for training providers? So those types of things are really important. You have to do your due diligence.
So Brandon, let me ask you, you're an attorney advising a fleet with say 2,000 trucks. They've had drivers in the seat, some of them for years. Do they need to look at those drivers to be sure they were trained by a reputable training firm and not a Boy Scout troop?
I'm going to give a similar answer to the one I gave earlier. It's you got to look at your particular situation because if you're a fleet that's already struggling to manage your existing compliance obligations, then you're probably not going to have time to bring everybody back in and take a look at their training provider. But to the extent you've got extra time available to you, I think not only this, but frankly, all driver qualification issues are always worth a second look because of how many driver qualification issues end up with these nuclear verdicts that we're hearing more and more about recently. So many of those stem largely from problems in the qualification process. So, to the extent you're a fleet that has the capacity to button that side of things up, I think that's well worth your time.
Well, and to that point, I think the obviously the road. Let's take road tests as an example, Brandon. Right? CDLs is acceptable in lieu of the road test, but Virginia Tech did some research a couple of years ago to look at what processes are fleets doing that can really help ensure a good driver, and having a good quality road test was one of them.
Yeah.
So you got to get your eyes on that driver and just don't assume that that provider is doing what they should be doing just because they're on the registry.
Yeah, as we've always said, you know, compliance is the floor. It's the bare minimum of what's expected of you. When you, God forbid, end up in litigation after a serious accident, just mere compliance with the regulations is not going to get you very far. They're going to be asking whether you acted reasonably under the circumstances, and that's going to take into consideration things like what your peers are doing, best practices, that type of stuff. So just keep that in the back of your mind.
As we all know, it even says in the regulations, these are the minimum requirements, and that statement alone will be stuffed up your nose in the wrong context. So, Hey, we got to move quickly. I think we only have time for one, maybe two questions, probably one. My colleague Alicia is hiding behind the curtain here. Alicia, do you have any questions that have come in that you could share with us?
We do. Let me pull that first one. Um, that first question is there a specific call out on the physical operator's license that indicates it is a non-domiciled license?
Yeah, they're supposed to be, right, Steve? And this was made clear in the IFR, even more clear than it had been. It's supposed to say non-domiciled on the face of the license. What we have, though, coming out in the audit findings is that a lot of states don't put that on the face of the license. There are other things you'll see, like limited term, I
Yeah,
think was one that you see a lot of. So if you're doing your own internal audit, you may find it tough to do because not all of them are going to look like that Pennsylvania example there.
that's right. And make sure you've got good contacts with your DMV, people you trust.
For sure. Alicia, what else you got?
Here's another one. You
Yep.
mentioned ramped up enforcement of the English language proficiency requirement. Do you think that will exacerbate the shortage of qualified buyers,
Now,
the
luck as
drivers?
luck would have it, I thought this one would come in because there's a lot of people on investor calls, like publicly traded fleets that are saying, "Hey, this is going to help industry capacity." So Steve Kepler and the folks at Fusible gave us some data on this. Steve, what does this story tell us in terms of the number of violations and the number of out of service violations?
So we've had 43,000 violations as highlighted here in yellow since June 25th when the out of service condition went into effect. And so about 28% of those were out of service. Now, the thing to keep in mind here is a good chunk of these violations are border zone violations, and that is not an out of service condition per the enforcement guidance from FMCSA. So that leaves us about 15,000 non-border English language proficiency violations. About 12,300 were out of service. So about three-fourths of those drivers that are identified are being put out of service. So, yes, it's a significant number compared to the overall industry number of drivers. It's not. I would say it's not a significant number, but once you couple that with what's going on with non-domiciled CDL and some other things, I saw a statistic the other day that in 2025, 5% of the for hire driver market was lost in 2025 versus 2024. So we're starting to see impacts to capacity. And so I think we'll see that continue.
Uh, I think the thing that people forget about, the one that really we should be paying attention to, because even just compare that number to like the number of drivers that are out of a job because of the clearinghouse violations, right? We've got tens of thousands of drivers. I think we're upwards of almost 100,000 drivers, if I have this correctly, that have a drug and alcohol disqualifying drug and alcohol violation, and they haven't gone through the return to duty process.
Right.
So if you're looking for a big universe of drivers, that's where you'll find them.
All right. So
Yeah,
I have, yeah, go ahead, Steve.
now, I just say on that point, though, Brandon, you're right. But if you look at enforcement data, there's still about 4 to 5,000 drivers that are being discovered roadside driving while in prohibited
That
status.
still have prohibited. Well, that's not
Wow.
surprising.
Right. So they're dropping down from CDLs and going to non-CDL. There's lots of things going on out there. So it's still a challenge. You're right.
All right, we have precious little time. I'm going to ask you the very last question of the day. It's the most difficult one of all. You ready? Who you got in
Sure.
the Super Bowl? Kepler?
I just want to see a good game.
Come on. You should be a weatherman. Come on, who you got? Who's going to win?
I think the Patriots.
I think you're right. Brandon?
I don't really have a dog in this fight, but because I'm from Indianapolis, we hate the Patriots, so I'm gonna go with the Seahawks.
So you can see yourself out. I'm a lifelong Patriot fan. But
Deflategate, right?
however, I'm kind of realistic about this one. I think they will play well, but boy, the Seahawks have a good team this year.
They
So
do. They
yeah,
do.
and so Steve, you can come on over, watch a game if you want. So we'll do that. So hey guys, genuinely, I appreciate you joining us and all the people who attended our webinar. We'll try to do more of these because we think they're really valuable to really summarize the issues very quickly and really what do you need to know to safely operate your business. So thanks again to you guys and